Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay first? Too loud, too quiet? Good, good. Okay, good. I'm Angela Metler. I'm an administrative assistant in the president's office at South Dakota Mines. Welcome to Steam Cafe. Thank you to those of you who are attending in person as well as online. We have been doing this since April of 2018. Steam Cafe is a partnership with South Dakota Mines, South Dakota Public Broadcasting, and Hay Camp Brewing. We appreciate everyone's support, yours and theirs. We would not be able to continue doing this without you in attendance and the partnerships that we have with them. So thank you very much for attending. Occasionally, we like to feature guest speakers from other universities. And tonight's speaker was arranged by our Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, kind of as a way to showcase what you can do with a degree in science, technology, and society from South Dakota Mines, for instance. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kathleen Sheppard from Missouri S&T.
Thank you very much. Everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Yeah, I am Kathleen Sheppard. I'm from Missouri S&T in Rolla, Missouri, very much like the South Dakota School of Mines. So thank you everybody for coming tonight. What is going to follow is not a typical academic talk. I want to share a story about two women, the first women to officially excavate in Egypt. Their work at the Temple of Mut in Karnak, which is here, and how their work and their lives in Luxor were centered at the Luxor Hotel. At the same time I tell this story, I'll show, I hope, that the hotel operated as an intellectual space and a dig house atmosphere for the European crew. That the hotel space played a significant part in the work that the excavators did. So it's not just the site, but it's the hotel as well. The Luxor Hotel was semi-public for tourists, with public areas and private hotel rooms for conversations, writing, artifact storage, and respite. As spaces built for European tourists, Luxor Hotel especially excluded the most important workers from an excavation, Egyptians. Egyptians were banned from the space, so they were not privy to creating or modifying ideas about their own heritage, which in turn had a major impact on who could play a part in studying the ancient Egyptian past. But I also want to weave in the love story between Margaret Benson and Janet Gourlay. Their relationship made their work possible, and they should be seen together as a scientific couple. Although their lives in the end were described with that dreaded state of unmarried, they in fact spent many years together excavating, writing, and traveling as partners. This story began on a bright, clear day in January 1894, when Margaret Benson, better known as Maggie to her friends and family, squinted her eyes against the sunlight coming off the deep blue water of the Mediterranean. She and her brother Fred had just made the crossing from the Greek port of Piraeus on a steamer bound for Alexandria, Egypt. The crossing was rough. The boat was tossed and turned by the turbulent waters of the ancient Roman lake. Maggie didn't really get seasick, but her stomach was only just starting to settle as she scanned the horizon for the Thomas Cook boat that should have been nearby. She couldn't see the boat meant to take Cook's tourists to shore, but she could see the flat coast of Alexandria, as you can see here, punctuated by the lighthouse near Ras El Tin Palace and Pompey's Pillar, which is over here. Her excitement was only slightly diminished by her brother's distress. Fred, who had not fared as well on the boat as his big sister, was watching the Egyptian health officials look over the steamer's passenger papers. He was fretting that the whole boat would be quarantined in port for 48 hours, as many boats were upon arrival from European ports. But all of a sudden, it seemed the health officials were gone, and the tourist boats, smaller vessels of all shapes, sizes, and colors, closed in on the larger steamer. It was the best water show Maggie had ever seen. On board the ship, porters were offering hotels, carriages, luggage services, river tours, and more. And Fred kept saying to anyone who asked, almost as a calming mantra in the confusion, "I want Cook. I want Cook." At some length, a cook's agent, dressed in the famous scarlet sweater with a bright yellow cook emblazoned on the front, found Fred and Maggie, and they were flooded with relief to be in good hands. And for the rest of their trip that year, if anyone offered them anything, they simply said, "I've got cook," and they were left alone. The Benson siblings had been traveling for weeks through southern France, Italy, and Greece, and had come to Egypt hoping to relieve the symptoms of Maggie's rheumatism, which in the 19th century was a vague diagnosis for a number of illnesses, including pulmonary inflammation and painful joints. Having suffered most of her life from stress, anxiety, and depression, and the physical ailments that accompanied them, she told her mother that she could feel the weather in cold, damp England and needed to get to warmer climes to heal. Like so many others before her, she thought that the sun, sand, and dry air of Egypt would allow her to recover her health and make her happy again. And for a while it did. Longtime travel partners, the Benson siblings, Fred and Maggie, began their first trip through Egypt on a Thomas Cook's cruise up the Nile to Aswan. While enjoying the cruise, Maggie took advantage of all of the amenities Cook's offered. She went on every possible excursion, happily sitting astride a donkey to venture to hidden tombs in the cliffs. And by late January of that first year, along with numerous other visitors, they decided to settle themselves in sunny Luxor for several weeks, staying at the Luxor Hotel. Maggie and Fred soon became so enamored of Egypt and Egyptians, both ancient and modern, that they arranged to return the following year to excavate in Luxor. And you can see here, this is the red sweater. You can barely see that yellow cooks right there, but this is who they were looking for. And these are some of the steamers that tourists would take. The Sudan is actually still in operation. That first season in 1895 would turn into 3 very successful excavation seasons in the Asher district of Karnak at the Temple of Mut. In fact, by the late 1890s, women were firmly entrenched in writing and living out travel narratives. So a number of women were able to travel to Egypt for enjoyment, health, and study. Soon, Benson would meet another woman like herself, Janet Gourlay, or Nettie, who would become her friend, lover, and excavation partner. Together, they would find hundreds of artifacts in the Temple of Mut, clear and remap part of the temple, and return many statues and other pieces to their original places. The resulting publication, The Temple of Mut in Asher, was published in 1899 by Victorian publishing giant John Murray. It was written for both the interested general public and archaeologists, and would become both a bestseller and a substantial contribution to the discipline of Egyptology. Together, the women also each found companionship and passionate love in the other. Maggie and Nettie were more successful and powerful together than they would have been apart, and their partnership was crucial to the work they did in Luxor at the end of the 19th century. Maggie Benson was born Margaret to Edward White Benson, a future Archbishop of Canterbury, and Mary Sidgwick, also called Minnie, on June 16, 1865. Maggie Benson ultimately had 5 siblings, 1 sister and 4 brothers, including Fred, who was 2 years younger than Maggie. And together with their parents, they made for a somewhat tense household. The fascinating tale of this Victorian family has been told in a few places, most recently in the Simon Goldhill book, A Very Queer Family Indeed. In it, Goldhill makes clear that thanks to the Victorian practice of letter writing and diary keeping, historians have thousands of pages of archival evidence about the Bensons. Fred and their other brother, Arthur Benson, wrote fictional and non-fictional biographical accounts of their family, putting the lives and loves of the family in full public view. Except for Edward, the Archbishop that we know of, everyone else in the family pursued same-sex love relationships, including Maggie's mother. Because of the constraints of Victorian expectations, this would cause heartbreak, anxiety, and depression for everyone involved. For Maggie, her anxiety would get the better of her and make her physically ill. By the time she was 18, as you can see here, Maggie was a tall, slim, brown-haired woman with a withering stare. She's very serious. She went to Oxford to study at Lady Margaret Hall, which had opened in 1879 as one of the first women's colleges in Oxford. In those days, women were not allowed to earn degrees at Oxford or Cambridge, but they could attend women-only classes, take exams, and complete all the requirements for a degree, just short of earning one. Maggie took up political and moral economy and excelled in it. In 1886, she earned first-class honors, but no degree, in the Women's Honor School of Philosophy. But when her time there was done, she was expected to return home and join her family at Lambeth Palace, the official residence of the Archbishop. While some have described her as having weak health, it was probably that her poor mental state was being reflected in her physical state. She had real physical maladies, and depression is now known to largely affect physical health. Her illnesses began with pain in her joints, which was diagnosed as rheumatism, and then they moved on to her heart, and then became a very serious illness in her throat and eyes. Ultimately, she had several mental breakdowns because of her frustrations with her physical illnesses, but the two were likely very closely connected, the physical and the mental illness. Her lack of health kept her from doing much in life in general, except for sort of laying in bed most of the time. So she decided to travel to see if she could beat some of those issues. So pairing with her brother Fred, they went to France, then Italy, and then on to Egypt. As they made their home at the Luxor Hotel in the spring of 1894, this is a postcard from the early 20th century, and I've marked here in Luxor where the Luxor Hotel was. They made their home at the Luxor Hotel in the spring of 1894, and Maggie decided to fully immerse herself in the comforts it offered. The hotel was built in 1877 and was the first Thomas Cook and Son built and owned hotel anywhere in the world. The hotel was surrounded by farmland, as you can see here, and was about 200 meters back from the Nile's banks and behind the Luxor Temple, which was right here. It was built of Nile mud bricks, some of them painted white, and some of them displaying their natural brown color. These bricks made for thick walls that would insulate against the extreme heat between the months of May and September, and allowed for a wide veranda where visitors would rest from their excursions, read and write letters, and visit with other guests. The hotel's gardens were large and luxurious with palm trees, aromatic flowers, and collected antiquities displayed around the grounds. You can see a couple of them here. To enter the hotel, visitors walked through a veritable forest of scent trees that had pretty little tufted yellow flowers, which made the air fragrant with their delicate perfume. Fred thought that the gardens were fit for the gods and made it practically impossible for Maggie to write letters home. She did tell her mother that, quote, "One thing that keeps attracting one's eyes is a red bougainvillea with sun on it against a background of pale blue sky and grayish palm trees. It is wonderful, and the birds are distracting." Distracting or not, the gardens were central to Maggie's sense of well-being in Luxor. And here's another picture. This is a photograph of the front of the Luxor Hotel. So you can see some of the antiquities here, and then you can see that Cook's office was just down that way. Indeed, visitors would find, visitors would find Egyptian-style decorations in the music, smoking, billiard, and drawing rooms. And despite the opulent setting, it took a while for the hotel to be brought up to the standards that tourists expected of Cook. They expected luxury. Instead, some complained about the food, the lack of comfortable chairs, and dirty rooms. By the time the Bensons arrived, Cook didn't own the hotel anymore, and most of the issues the visitors had complained about seemed to be fixed. And for travelers like the Bensons, who wanted to make a long stay in Luxor, the hotel offered a discount, as well as daily morning coffee, lunch, and a substantial dinner. Being a long-term resort hotel, the Luxor also had a resident English doctor, a Dr. Longmore, who worked at the local hospital as well. This medical connection continued to draw people to the hotel who needed treatment and rest, like Maggie did. For Fred and Maggie in 1894, the situation was ideal. Maggie's breathing had gotten much better over the weeks that they'd been traveling, and she had no pain in her joints. So she reveled in the luxuries at the Luxor Hotel and continued improving her health. She wasn't laid up in bed anymore. She could actually walk around and take a deep breath. So she was pretty happy. She enjoyed sitting on the wide terrace for meals and tea. She lounged in the garden. She slept very well in her comfortable rooms, and she was able to go on what she called a lovely little expedition every day. Toward the end of their first trip in Egypt in mid-March, Maggie had heard that there was a place nearby that she could see granite statues with the heads of cats and wanted to investigate. So she got on her trusted donkey, accompanied by her donkey boy and Fred, and rode from the Luxor Temple to Karnak Temple. The two temples, here's Temple of Luxor and Karnak Temple, are almost 2 miles apart. And Maggie took her donkey alongside the ancient route, which was an avenue of ram-headed sphinxes. In ancient times, this road went from the front pylon of Luxor Temple to the gateway that leads to the Temple of Karnak. Most of this road has now today been excavated and much of it's walkable, but in 1894 it wasn't. So Benson rode on a dirt track between the flowing Nile River on her left here and the Avenue of Sphinxes on her right, with the sun high above her head until she entered the ancient palm grove that surrounded Karnak Temple. The palms, she recalled, quote, cast interlacing shadows on the path, and the sphinxes hold between their paws little figures of the king who erected them. Once they reached Karnak, the road turned right down this other avenue of sphinxes and took them into the northern gate of the Temple of Mut, surrounded by the sacred lake of Asher. This was the name of the precinct of this part of the temple complex. The rest of the Karnak temple complex is over here, as you can see. The mother goddess Mut was the consort of the chief god Amun, whose main temple complex in all of Luxor was at Karnak. So it was fitting that Mut's temple was connected to it. Together with their offspring, the god Khonsu, who also had a temple connected to his parents at Karnak, they were known as the Theban Triad and were regularly celebrated in the New Kingdom in this way. The Temple of Mut, this is Amun, and here is Mut and Khonsu. The Temple of Mut had originally been built in the early 18th dynasty, but was later refurbished by the queen Hatshepsut. As the only female pharaoh, Hatshepsut identified with the mother goddess Mut, and needing to strengthen the legitimacy of her rule, she tried to make a powerful and concrete connection to her in life. Mut could be depicted as a vulture, a cow, or a woman in a red dress, but many statues she was Sekhmet, the strong-willed lion-headed goddess, and other times as the more relaxed, peaceful cat Bastet. It was these remnants of the Temple of Mut that were waiting to be found beneath the packed Nile mud. When Maggie arrived, she saw that the temple itself was almost completely destroyed, but there were a few black granite statue heads jutting up out of the sandy, parched earth. Now, this is in 1899 after they had cleared most of the temple, but this is the forecourt that she was looking at. The gates were filled with dirt almost to their tops, making access to the inner temple very difficult. The walls of the temple were so broken and buried that there was very little anyone could see of the temple upon visiting. Figures were scattered about, Maggie wrote, quote, at one place a group, at another a single mutilated head, and again 2 figures close together leaned toward one another as if they were secretly lamenting the downfall of the great gods. At the far end of the temple, a lion-headed figure, quaintly whitened by saltpeter from the soil, stood out against the background of the lake, end quote. As she continued to look around, she could see around her the old and the new. The homes in the village of Karnak were built in and around the great ancient pylons of Karnak Temple, glowing in the sun. The shady palm groves broke enough so that she could see the Libyan hills on the west bank of the Nile that had watched over this sacred area for thousands of years. Presently, girls were grazing their goats, women were leading cattle to water for a drink, and men were washing themselves nearby. As she breathed deeply in the slightly sweet-smelling air, felt the wind play on her cheeks, and basked in the warmth of the setting sun, she wondered if she might be able to stay here. She found help from her brother and the Swiss Egyptologist Edward Navy, who supported her plans of clearing the site to bring the ancient back into the present. But it wasn't that no one had ever tried to clear this temple before. It had just been a really long time. In the 1840s, Auguste Mariette with Carl Lepsius had cleared part of the temple area and created a map of it, which appeared in Mariette's 1875 book, Karnak. American millionaire Charles Wilbur improved on Mariette's map in the 1880s, but never published his work. Neither of these men really excavated or cleared the debris. Mariette had done some of the clearing of the northern court, but not much else. So there was some hope that Maggie could do some original work. Her first application for permission was refused, but Navy promptly wrote to Jacques de Morgan, who was then the head of the Department of Antiquities, to support her application, and de Morgan immediately granted her permission. With this, she became the first woman given official permission to excavate in Egypt. She was warned, however, not to expect to find anything at the temple, which is likely why she was allowed to work there. The Bensons were also able to pay for their own project, which almost guaranteed permission to dig at this point in time. Despite the barriers Maggie faced as a woman, recovering from illness, and with no archaeological training whatsoever, she began to feel like a real Egyptologist as she made preparations for the first season. But that first season was short. It lasted about 5 weeks, and it started on January 1st, 1895. When Maggie and Fred arrived at the site that morning, there were over 30 men and boys waiting to work, and as was customary, all of them had brought their own baskets and picks. You bring your own equipment. Maggie was dismayed at what she saw as chaos, but was simply the normal hiring process of choosing people to work on site. They were shouting at her, they were crowding her, she wasn't sure what to do. So she took heart when another European excavator working nearby told her not to worry. He routinely broke many sticks across the backs of Egyptians while trying to maintain proper order during the selection process. No doubt an interesting insight into the working conditions and abuse Egyptians endured while excavating. The Bensons chose to start out with 4 men and 16 boys, an overseer, a night guardian, and a water carrier. The men were the diggers. The boys took on the role of basket boys, hauling baskets of dirt from the excavation to a mound to be sifted and disposed of. The overseer, or race, was generally in charge of the diggers, keeping order and reporting back to the archaeologist in charge, which was Maggie. Their first race asked for higher wages than normal because he wished to be compensated for having to report to a woman. He did not last long on the job. The night guardian had the unenviable task of protecting the site at night from the possibility of plundering by his own neighbors. Some watchmen would allow their friends or family to trespass in the dark of night, and the following day claim to have accidentally fallen asleep. So they don't know what happened. The water carrier who filled and carried a bucket of drinking water to all the workers was a young veiled girl. The crew worked 10-hour days in the sun, usually with breaks during the hottest part of the day. In the publication of their excavation, Maggie didn't mention the names of her crew, and many archaeologists, including Maggie and Fred, didn't consider their names to be very important, even though the crew did all the heavy lifting. And this, what I'm describing, is a typical late 19th century excavation in Egypt run by Europeans. Because Maggie was the one to be granted permission to run an excavation in Egypt, she was considered to be the one in charge. It's hard to overstate how important Maggie's position was for women in archaeology in Egypt. For over 100 years, European men had been coming to Egypt, excavating, collecting, and publishing work about the ancient Egyptian world, often with the help and hard work of their invisible, unpaid wives or female assistants. Now, for the first time, a woman's name would appear as the lead archaeologist on a site. Maggie had the help of her brother Fred, who had excavated in Athens previously, and the Egyptologist Percy Newberry, who was working on a survey of the Theban necropolis just across the river. And others who were nearby or corresponded with her to give her advice were Navy and Flinders Petrie. As they got to work, Maggie assumed they would only find smaller pieces, foundation deposits, and remnants of walls or pillars. She held out hope for a cat statue or two. The first day, the diggers began to work in the gateway of the temple, that area that Maggie had seen the year before that was buried almost to the top. The workers cleared the earth, and the boys carried basket after basket of discarded dirt, creating a massive mound. It took them several days, but they found the ancient pavement 10 or 12 feet below. As they dug, they found roofing blocks that had fallen in some ancient day, and they were able to read a few names inscribed on the gate itself, including the kings Seti I, Ramses IV, and Ramses VI. They also uncovered a lion-headed statue lying across the path, which they were able to raise up out of the dirt and replace, sitting it upright. As they continued to clear the dirt down to the original floor level, they uncovered a total of 4 pairs of pillars in the main court, and not 5, as Mariette's map shows. But again, he'd not cleared all the way down to the floor. He'd simply made some assumptions. As they continued to work all around the court, they found 8 lion-headed statues, 5 of which were complete, 2 were missing their heads, and a very large statue of which they only found the upper half. Surprisingly for the Bensons, and probably also surprisingly for the Department of Antiquities, in that short season they found dozens of statues, pieces of statues, coins, and other small artifacts. Maggie wrote home to her father that the best find from the year in the last days of their excavation. As they rode their donkeys out to the site one February morning, one of the boys ran up to meet them to announce that the crew had found a statue near where the north and west walls of the main court came together. So right about here. Everyone on the site was celebrating as Fred and Maggie arrived. They saw that the statue was being washed of excess dirt, and they could see it was a squatting scribe with his arms crossed on the tops of his knees, with a young face and inscriptions all over the black granite surface. It was a black granite statue of a young scribe, a Menemhat from the reign of Amenhotep II, that Maggie described was almost perfect. She wrote immediately to Georges d'Hérisy, then the inspector of Upper Egypt, trying to decide where the statue should be temporarily kept. After some discussion with the sub-inspector, d'Hérisy told Maggie and Fred that they could remove it to their rooms at the Luxor Hotel for safekeeping. First, it sat outside the hotel to be photographed, and then Maggie wrote to her father, quote, "I'm going to have it in my room." The statue eventually went to the museum at Giza in the museum steamer, and Maggie got a cast of the statue to keep. She was also feeling much better and physically stronger throughout this season in Luxor. She spent time outside, breathing the dry, fresh desert air, lounging in the hotel garden and on the veranda, reading and chatting with new friends, and haggling with antiquities dealers. Later on in the conclusion, I'll draw together more clearly how they used the Luxor Hotel as a dig house. But for now, it's crucial that we understand that Maggie and Fred, as the leaders of this excavation, did a lot of their thinking, meeting, and talking about the site here, at the breakfast table or over tea on the veranda at the hotel. So Fred and Maggie, who had dubbed themselves the wandering children of the Benson family for all the traveling they did together, went home every spring and then arrived back in Egypt in the winter. In late December 1895, they were back at their familiar lodgings in the Luxor Hotel. They took some respite time in Luxor at first, touring, reading, and relaxing. Fred just wanted to be left alone. Like he told Maggie, please don't even talk to me. It was an ideal month of January, and Maggie's health continued to improve after a depressing and difficult, damp English summer. They started their season strong at the end of January 1896 with more staff than the previous year, so they could cover even more ground and even work simultaneously at 2 separate pits. Fred and Maggie were able to hire between 8 and 12 men to dig, 24 basket boys, a race, 2 night guardians, and a water girl. The day before they got to work on January 29th, Maggie was at the Luxor Hotel, enjoying the fact that she could breathe deeply in the dry air and move without pain. Her friend, Lady Jane Lindsay, found her and introduced her to the woman who was about to change her life forever, Janet Gourlay. Not much is known about Nettie except for what we know from Maggie and a few records at University College London and the Griffith Institute in Oxford. Nettie was an early student of Flinders Petrie at University College London, so she had some archaeological training and could help on the excavation. She also had some of her father's money to help supplement the excavation's budget. Both women in their lives suffered from disabling illnesses, so each understood the lifestyle the other needed to lead. Nettie had as deep a sense of love and devotion as Maggie did, which bound them to each other as lovers and partners for the rest of their lives. Well, please don't be, this is a long quote. I just wanted you to have the words in front of you as I read it. While Maggie's friendships were known by all her family to be intense attachments, this one was different, almost on a higher plane. As you can see from this photograph, they're really connected. At the end of this second season, in May of 1896, Maggie wrote to her mother about Nettie as she had never written about anyone else. "How can I keep you up in this? For it changes so every day. Oh, I hope you'll like her. You can't help it if you know her, but she is so horribly shy. She's only 33, but she makes me feel like a little girl sometimes. And you know I don't do that particularly easily. She told me she hadn't ever talked so much to anyone before. Oh, Mother, it's so odd to me to make a friendship like this. Generally, there has been something in the way. Mostly, I've not been sure of the other person, and generally, I've had a radical element of distrust. But here, one can't help trusting her absolutely, and it's only myself I distrust. She's so much bigger and so much finer and more delicate in mind than most women." When Maggie and Nettie were forced to be apart, they wrote passionate letters to each other. Maggie wrote several to Nettie over the summer of 1896 when they were back in England at their own homes, but no responses to Maggie survive that we know of. She missed Nettie and fantasized about spending quiet nights with her, again writing, quote, "I had been dreaming of you, as usual, unsatisfactorily. namely that we had gone to Egypt for a week only and nonsense of that kind. Later, still lonely and wishing for Nettie's warm company, Maggie closed another letter, quote, "Oh, dearest, I wish I knew the Gaelic language, for I believe you're able to say all sorts of affectionate things in English, or which English can't express. I do want you in bodily presence very badly, my dearest," end quote. Her love for Nettie was also apparent in her improving mental and physical health that season. Just a few days after the women met, Fred wrote home to their mother in the middle of February that Maggie was so lively and happy that he hardly recognized her. Yes, it was the sunny weather, the dry, fresh air, and the physical work on site that were all helping her mental and physical state. But more than that, it was Nettie and the true connection the two of them shared. Maggie's relationships and the emotions they brought out in her had always had an immense impact on how she felt. The team were also working. During this highly productive season, they were able to update Marriott's map of the Mut precinct of the temple, and they found statuary pretty quickly upon beginning their work at the end of January in 1896. The ground where they were digging was unusually tough to dig through. The men were picking away, digging with their shovels in hands, but hardly making any progress. Once they finally broke through, they had found some pots, which was always good, but they had gotten a taste for the bigger granite statues and they wanted to find more. Nearby, they unearthed a black granite lion head that belonged to a statue they thought would be about 16 feet high. They continued to uncover fragments of the statue and ultimately sent all of them to the museum in Cairo for restoration. That is Maggie right there at the top of the hill. As they continued digging, they found so much stonework, statuary, and alabaster that work moved really slowly. They were able to find the bases of the walls so they could fix more of the mapping, and they also cleared a second courtyard. One of their main finds, according to the site report from that year, was a rose granite statue of Ramses II. It was large and broke in two pieces when they tried to upend it, but they found it basically where they believed it originally lay, and they were able to return it to its appropriate spot. They tried to move into the temple's hypostyle hall after that, which is where all the columns are. But because so much stone from the columns had fallen, they had decided to dig some foundation deposits instead. Toward the end of the excavation that year, and a few days after finding almost a dozen more statues and pieces of statues in granite and alabaster, they got a visit from Georges Legrand, the inspector at Luxor at the time and until 1917. He approached the crew and yelled at Maggie because she had been keeping artifacts and other small pieces they'd found in their rooms at the Luxor Hotel. He immediately demanded of Maggie and Nettie that they relinquish all of their pieces to him. Maggie was so despondent that she was brought to tears trying to defend her actions. No matter what they tried to say, Legrand would not listen to them. The director of the Department of Antiquities, Jacques de Morgan, the person who had given them permission to dig, was Legrand's boss. De Morgan had told Maggie, Nettie, and Fred that they could and should keep everything they find in the hotel for safekeeping. This was not an uncommon thing for archaeologists to do. In fact, Flinders Petrie was known to put finds in boxes, wooden boxes, and then lay his mattress on top of those boxes to form a bed frame on which he would sleep. And this was fine. As Legrand was berating the women, who were teary-eyed and at a complete loss for words, Fred walked up to see what the problem was. He defended his sister and her partner, arguing that De Morgan had given them permission to do what they did. And after Fred made his case, no doubt the same case Maggie and Nettie had tried making, Legrand backed down. He relented and told them that if they would take complete responsibility for the safety of the objects, they could take them back to the hotel. Legrand's attack on Maggie and Nettie should be seen as an attack on what Legrand thought was a woman-led expedition that didn't know what it was doing and didn't belong there. Once Fred, a man, and one trained as an archaeologist no less, arrived on the scene, Legrand's demeanor changed and their course of work was allowed to continue. For Legrand, women simply did not lead excavations. In the end, after only about 5 weeks of digging in 1896, they had found dozens more pieces of statues and 2 nearly complete statues, one of an 18th dynasty architect known as Senenmut, and one of Bakan Khansu, a high priest of Amun during the 19th dynasty reign of the pharaoh Ramses II. They were allowed to keep one statue of Ramses II and heads of Ramses III and an unnamed god. They left digging in this spot and would pick it up again immediately here the next season as well, which is this spot right here. As they both went back to their respective homes, Maggie's letter to her dearest Nettie grew more and more passionate. Maggie also began to feel more depressive and anxious, which she likened to, quote, the way clouds grow and fade on a hot day. And she worried that she physically felt the separation from her lover. They were able to meet a few times in the off season, but it wasn't easy to do. Maggie was constantly worried about Nettie, how she was feeling, if she was getting enough or too much exercise, how her new dresses were going to look on her, and more. Maggie wanted to touch and see and smell and love Nettie in person, not from a distance. They frequently planned trips of errands to do in London so that they could steal away from their families to meet. They were still able to see each other with relative frequency, but it was difficult to get away in the summer. They were openly declaring their love for one another by early October, and of course making plans to go back to Egypt together in late November. Their final season began even better than the previous two. They started with more money than before, possibly due to some inheritance on Maggie's part. Her father had died a couple of months previous, and Nettie's father gave them some money too. So they had enough money to hire a huge crew, 8 diggers and 40 basket boys. The previous season, the crew had left the site only partly cleared, and there was a lot of dirt left to move. They hired workers on the 9th of January and began work the next day. But the crew began work here on this southern slope before Maggie, Nettie, and Fred arrived at the site, and they immediately found more statuary in this very place, the place that their dig had ended the year before. The latecomers were summoned from their lie-in at the Luxor Hotel by some of their crew, and when they finally arrived on site, they found the crew working hard on their old mound. As Maggie and Nettie peered into the dirt, they saw 2 large masses of black granite peeking out. The granite itself would have stood out from the brown Nile dirt, making it quite a contrast on the ground. You couldn't miss it. One piece was a fragment that matched a statue of a powerful priest from the 26th dynasty, Thebes from the 1896 season. The other chunk of granite was the head and shoulders of possibly that same priest, Mentuhotep. Once the pieces were fully uncovered, it was found that they were both beautifully worked, and Maggie noted that this head was distinctly un-Egyptian in type, with wrinkles around the eyes and a flattened forehead, making what she said was, quote, a powerful rendering of a powerful personality. This is a modern picture of it. It was one of the main prizes of the whole season, found on the very first day. Also on that first day, they found even more in their new trenches, 14 pieces of statues, some of them with heads and faces intact. They found pieces of roofing and flooring stones, a number of column bases with which they traced more accurate mapping, and more accurate than Mariette and more accurate than their map the year before. Overall, they found pieces of 15 inscribed statues, an alabaster arm, a sphinx, a statue head of a Saite woman, and a lot of lion-headed Sekhmet statues, which began to be run-of-the-mill for the crew, and other small pieces. Many of these went to the Cairo Museum, but Nettie and Maggie were allowed to take some home, as was customary in excavating agreements at the time. The last few days of the season and the last that the group would ever excavate at the Temple of Mut, the crew worked on getting the temple back in order. Legrand's race helped the crew even mend a number of the lion-headed statues, and about 100 of them were replaced around the first court, but that was only half of the number of statues they had found. When they left, the lake in the Asher district, here, still surrounded the temple on 3 sides and shone with the rising and setting sun, while the larger statue of the goddess Sekhmet had been put back into her place, presiding over the open, sun-drenched courts. The large and imposing main pylons and columns of the Temple of Karnak lay to the north. Gazing to the west, visitors would see the Libyan mountains and watch the sun set over the ancient gods and goddesses who had ruled the lives and deaths of people here for millennia. Maggie had longed to make the temple accessible to visitors so others could marvel at the work of ancient hands, as she had done the first time she had ridden her donkey down the Avenue of Sphinxes to see the temple for the first time. Throughout their time in Luxor, they used the Luxor Hotel partly as a dig house where they stored their artifacts, showed artifacts to inspectors, and bought pieces from antiquities dealers. Importantly, as other scholars have shown, the purpose of the dig house varied, but especially early on, dig houses operated under colonial norms by removing Europeans from the work site and separating themselves from the Egyptian excavators. An obvious purpose is for archaeologists to have a center for scientific work. I argue here in a 2019 article about the Hotel Winter Palace in Luxor and in a forthcoming book that archaeologists like Maggie and Fred used hotels as dig houses, as archaeological think tanks, where they were able to talk about, write about, and think about what they were finding, far from the distractions of supervising the diggers under the hot sun. Scholars have largely overlooked the role of hotels as central places in Egypt where knowledge was constructed. I argue implicitly here and more explicitly in the book that hotels were central archaeological truth spots and places of knowledge generation. They were important places where scientists would come together to work out new theories and prepare themselves for the following day's work. As we've talked about, these archaeological truth spots include dig houses, hotels, but also trains, boats, end-of-the-day fireside or pub chats. Truth spots are places that help people develop credible knowledge based on their geographic location and the discussions that give the place distinctive meaning and value. Truth spots are spaces where ideas gain credibility and are a vital cause of that enhanced believability. By separating themselves and protecting themselves in their work in a colonial space, built, owned, and run by white Europeans, the Bensons were able to make Luxor Hotel into a truth spot for their work. Egyptians weren't given the chance to participate in this process, thereby lending even more authority to European knowledge at the time. It also meant that Egyptians were excluded from learning about, much less talking about, their heritage. For archaeologists traveling to the field, a central space for their practice, but geographically and scientifically on the periphery, and living in a hotel for any period of time, made hotels the least formal arenas for discussing new data and theories. The relative lack of professional rules in these spaces freed archaeologists from the formality of science at the site or in the museum and allowed their ideas to flow more freely. As other scholars have argued, these spaces also allowed more people than ever to participate in the practice of scientific discussion, which is likely one big reason Maggie Benson was able to excavate at the Temple of Mut. However informal the space in this period, again, Egyptians in general were still excluded. Once they were back in England for good, Maggie and Nettie continued to see each other frequently and for long periods of time. Nettie sometimes lived with the Benson family for months. They continued working on the first excavation report published by two women, the Temple of Mut and Asher, which came out in 1899. They also returned to Egypt in 1900 for some fresh air and more health benefits. And Nettie continued to excavate in Egypt, working with Percy Newberry in 1900 to 1901. In 1906, they had a portrait made of the two of them, which has become sort of famous. Both strong, confident women in their late 30s, early 40s, with seemingly a long, loving life ahead of them. This portrait has been described by none other than National Geographic as a picture of women who had become fast friends years before. But the truth is, they were in love and remained attached to one another until Nettie's death in 1912. Maggie's relationship with Nettie was fraught, but not for the reasons we might think. In these same-sex relationships, women had a lot more power than they would have had on their own, especially in the sciences. In most of the biographical information about Maggie and Nettie in the history of Egyptology, their lives are discussed as interwoven from the time they met until each of them died unmarried. Unmarried. That dreaded state describes their lives in the end. But that wasn't the full story. Much like these women, many other same-sex female couples, especially from before the mid-20th century, have been identified as constant companions and intimate friends in modern biographies. Often, each woman died after technically never having been married, but after having lived together for decades. And often, we don't know many details about their lives together. But we do know that they and others in their circles perceived them as a couple, and that in itself is powerful representation and recognition. In the history of archaeology for this period, these same-sex marriage relationships were often necessary for women to participate in the field. Women needed to travel, but if they were not married to men, they needed a traveling companion. To work in more isolated places like Egypt, women needed assistants and partners to help them. These partnerships were expected of educated English women who often traveled abroad. And for archaeologists, these relationships often operated very much like straight marriages by giving the women freedom to travel where they needed to go without judgment or hindrance. They were able then to take along the support they needed in remote locations, and importantly, the power to do their work. In the case of Maggie and Nettie, these two wealthy, educated women could work without needing a man in a period when it was very difficult for a woman to do so on her own. In the usually masculine and muscular history of Egyptology, there is a distinct erasure of queer partnerships in favor of discussing the importance of straight marriages and even extramarital affairs as factors in professional success. While straight couples like Flinders and Hilda Petrie have made their way into a growing pantheon of scientific couples, we center heteronormativity as a framework for understanding science. However, especially for women in field sciences like Egyptology, being in a same-sex scientific and domestic partnership clearly made them more productive professionally and more secure socially than they would have been as single women. By working with Maggie, for instance, because of Maggie, Nettie had the funds and permission to excavate in Luxor. By working with Maggie, Nettie had the opportunity to put her university training to work and publish important scholarship. Because of Nettie, Maggie had a trained Egyptologist working on site with her who would treat her as an equal and not as an assistant or a subordinate. They were a true scientific couple in the field, and their productivity together shows that. Ignoring or treating as secondary the relationship that was very much central to Maggie's and Nettie's lives erases an important part of each of their stories. And in continuing to portray their relationship as secondary, we do them a disservice. The personal and professional relationships and the work Maggie and Nettie were able to accomplish, including the continuation of analysis and organization of the finds, was done within the confines of the Luxor Hotel. Over the course of 3 seasons, Maggie, Nettie, and Fred, along with the excavation crew, cleared much of the temple itself of landfill, exposing foundation deposits and finding remains and pieces of over 200 statues and countless pieces of sculpture. They also reorganized the interior, attempting to restore such items as columns and some statuary to their original locations. But the organization and the plan of the work and the report that came from it were efforts led by Maggie Benson in conjunction with Nettie Gourlay. The Colonial Hotel context helped to guide their work decisions and the knowledge they shared. The Luxor Hotel's facade remains in Luxor, here and here you can see, as do the legacies of centuries of colonial practices on the knowledge about ancient Egypt. I hope that the hotel can be rebuilt. Thank you. What questions do we have? Happy to entertain any. Yes.
So why was that the final thesis? Were they done?
Maggie got really sick. And they had to be home for a few years so that she could recover. So in 1890, this isn't funny. In 1897, at the end of the dig season, she actually she suffered from a case of pleurisy, which is when you get fluid between the lining of your lungs and your actual lungs. So it makes it really hard to breathe. It feels like sandpaper. And so it made it so hard to breathe that one of her lungs collapsed. She had to have Dr. Longmore actually come in with a large gauge needle, stick it in between her ribs and drain the fluid from her lungs. Right after that, she had a heart attack. This was all in Luxor. This was all in her hotel room in Luxor. So she had to recover. As they were on their way back home in Egypt recovering, her brother, Hugh, who had come to visit, came down with typhoid. And so did another person from their crew. So they kind of said, we're done for a little while. We're going to go home. When they came back in 1900, it was because Nettie really wanted to excavate, and Maggie, of course, wanted to come with her. So they were coming down to do that. So that's why she got sick. I mean, could you imagine like having somebody come in? Yeah, I won't go into it. The details are pretty gruesome, but she survived. She thought she was going to die, but she survived. Happily so, I guess. Yeah, go for it. Do it.
What the state of
The Johns Hopkins University and the Brooklyn Museum in New York are both excavating on it right now. And they've been working on it since the 1970s. So basically from 1900 or so until about the 1970s, nobody was really working on it because everybody is focused on the main temple complex because it's Amun's big temple complex and it had been built on for centuries and millennia. So Mut and Kansu are kind of over to the side, but it's still being excavated and being worked on. Good question. Yeah, what else? In the back. Oh, hi. Maggie's story after Nettie's death. She suffered a schizophrenic episode and ended up having to, her story is just absolutely fascinating. Nettie actually ended up dying in a nursing home because she had gotten so ill. And then Maggie was really upset that she couldn't like be with her that whole time, suffered a schizophrenic episode. They think like this is sort of the forensic diagnosis, basically like sort of looking back on the symptoms. And she was then cared for at home for the rest of her life by a nurse. And she ended up dying, I think just a few years after Nettie. Yeah. That's her story. But, you know, her mother, I believe, outlived her, and quite a few of her brothers did as well. They were this huge family, just sort of a kind of a quintessential Victorian family, right? Just really, their story is just really fascinating and interesting to read about. Her father was 26 when he proposed to her mother, who was 12 years old at the time. Oh yeah. He waited till she was 18 to actually marry her, but he asked her to marry him and she just burst into tears. So that's not the recipe for a happy story. And their kids knew it too. They were just like, man, that was kind of messed up. In Victorian speak. Yes, an online question. He did. He had excavated in Athens with the British School of Archaeology in Athens. And then with a guy called David Hogarth, who was a classicist, a British classicist who is a pretty famous classicist. And he also, Hogarth ended up, he had excavated in Alexandria, Egypt, and Fred Benson had gone up there to help him do that in 1895. So as Maggie was excavating in Luxor, he went up to help excavate in Alex, and they found nothing of any import classics wise. So Hogarth sort of wrote it off as, if you want to find anything that's like Roman, go to Rome, don't come here. All you classicists, you know, despair and just leave. So he and Benson kind of wrote that sort of report, and then Benson went back, Fred went back down to help Maggie. And he continued to do some archaeology after that, but really he got into writing, and he wrote something like over 100 books and short stories. He wasn't really like a bestseller. He wasn't like a super popular author, but he just wrote a bunch of stuff. Yeah. I saw another hand. Yeah. There are rumors that they are going to rebuild it. The Luxor saw its last guests in the 1980s and kind of closed down after that. I think probably just because it was so old and run down, but the building is still there. I really hope they don't tear it down. Just a few years ago, they tore down a really old, beautiful hotel in Cairo. Nobody wanted them to tear it down, but it was so derelict that they had no choice. And now it's just, nobody knows what's going to go up there. So a lot of people are hoping that they refurbish the Luxor Hotel. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Those are my pictures. They're not great, but it was hard to get access. So I hope they rebuild it. Yeah, what else? Yeah.
From a financial standpoint, any guess what they came there with their set amount of funding, how much went to lodging versus hiring workers?
Oh, that's a great question. So how much funding went to lodging versus hiring their workers? Let's see. I don't I have data on what it costs to be at the Luxor Hotel, but I can't remember what it was. But I guarantee you they paid more for their hotel than they did their workers. But the thing, and this is not to defend them underpaying their workers, but they would underpay them in general, mainly because these were farmers, right? And they made most of their money from their fields and from their crops. And they did this work for status, right? Because if you were chosen to work on that excavation, you were seen as big man in the village. This was very important for their status. But also they didn't depend on, if they didn't get the excavation job, big whoop, you know, that's okay. They're still farmers and they're still doing okay. It was also, they really wanted these jobs so they could pocket the small pieces and then sell them to tourists. So they made a lot of extra money doing that, which I find really interesting because Maggie was like, I hope these people better not be stealing from my excavation. Yet she would turn around and go back to the hotel that night and then buy antiquities off of dealers from other sites that they had stolen that day. So she was okay to do it, but she would get mad if somebody else did it to her. So, yeah. Yeah. Good question. So how did each family get their money? Nettie was Scottish and her father was called Henry, and that's all I know about her. So I wish I knew more. I think he was some sort of prosperous textile something, possibly. But with the Bensons, Edward Benson was a mover and shaker in the Anglican Church. So he went to, I believe he was educated at Cambridge, and really wanted to work his way up in the Anglican Church. So he made sure that that was his ambition, and you get paid more and more as you become Archbishop of Canterbury. That's like, for those who may not know, the Archbishop of Canterbury is like except for the monarch in England, it's the highest church official in England. So it's a very big deal. Maggie's mother, who was actually related to Edward Benson, they were like second cousins or something like that. Her mother, their family had some family money from her own mother's side. So like the Sidgwick, Mary Sidgwick was Maggie's mother. Mary Sidgwick's mother had money that she brought to the family. And when Edward Benson died, when the Archbishop of Canterbury died, Queen Victoria actually came to Lambeth Palace to mourn with Maggie's family, while Maggie's mother's lover, who was the daughter of the previous archbishop, was like living in the castle with them. Yeah. And they shared a bed for a number of years. And Edward just sort of slept kind of on the side while they sort of took up the middle. I mean, it is an absolutely mind-blowing story. You've got to read this book by Simon Goldhill. It's fascinating stuff. It's better than a soap opera. Yeah. Yeah, what happened to the antiquities? So a lot of them went back to the Cairo Museum. Maggie brought a lot of them home, and even though she didn't have any kids, she had a very good, it was her cousin. Yes, it was her cousin's son and daughter who she sort of took over care of when she was about 18, and they became very close. She left her antiquities to him, and his name was Stuart something, and I don't remember what. He donated most of those to a university museum, and a lot of those are there, and then he sold some at auction in the 1970s. So some of them are on display in a museum that Maggie took home herself, and then some went to auction. And as for Nettie's, I don't know. There's a really helpful source that I haven't dug a ton through. It's called the Topographical Bibliography, and it's basically these two women took catalogs of these sites and traced everywhere that they went. So I need to look more into that, but that's what I know so far. It's a great question. Yeah, these are awesome questions. Anything else? Yes.
With all of the work that's been done on Egyptology over these many years,
yeah,
what is the expectation that there's still what you might call major finds to be discovered?
Oh, that's a great question. I think everybody has the hope, right? And the expectation that they're going to find something really big. But just recently, I think there was a big urban discovery by Zahi Hawass. And, he runs in and claims all of those. And then, sorry, is this being recorded? Oops. And recently there was a Netflix documentary called The Secrets of the Saqqara Tomb. And they had found a tomb there. And they just this year found another tomb that they didn't know happened. So, because it's all, it's millennia. It's got to be tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, right? Who were living there for 3,000 years. So I personally think there's still a ton to be found. Especially under urban spaces like in Cairo, how it just sort of expanded without excavation of everything that they were, expanding and things like that. So I think there's still a pretty big expectation, still surprise, but it's still expected. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would think statistically,
Mhm.
from a statistical perspective, you could probably see a bell curve of discoveries over the years.
Yep.
And then how much more can you expect, just being a mathematician.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And in fact, I was really surprised, just as an example of how much there really is. A friend of mine wrote a piece about animal mummies being used as fertilizer in Britain. So there was just one shipment of hundreds, 18 tons of cat mummies. They loaded up on a ship and brought them up to northern England to grind up and use as fertilizer. 18 tons, right? That's a lot of animal mummies, but there's more. Like there's more of them. Yeah.
Are you familiar with that book by Mark Twain, Innocents Abroad? When they were going up that Nile, they were using mummies as fuel, and he just, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, these plebeians don't work for the crop.
Yes. And here's the thing, that they were really doing that. You'd really dry out the mummy and then you can use it for firewood. They used mummies for a lot of things, fertilizer, firewood. They would grind it up and eat it. They would use it as medicine. They would grind it up and put it into pigments and call it mummy brown. They used it for a ton of stuff. Yeah, I love Mark Twain's Innocents Abroad is rife, as all Mark Twain is, with pullable quotes. He's fantastic. Yeah, I love that one. What else? Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. That is an excellent question, and one that I think more Egyptologists need to ask themselves. So what's the benefit of allowing these white European-based or American-based institutions coming into Egypt to dig? So Egyptians were excluded from Egyptology largely until about the 1930s. There were a couple who were some well-known Egyptologists early on, but they weren't really allowed to even be educated in Egyptology until the 1930s. So they were really excluded from the practice. After that point, they moved in and kind of took a lot of it over, but they also, the Department of Antiquities, the Ministry of Antiquities now in Egypt, see the benefit of these foreign dollars, right? Coming in and foreign expertise coming in and doing these sorts of things. But they've also worked it out that like, hey, that's great. You can pay for all of this. You're not taking anything with you anymore. So like all of this money can come in, be invested. Great. We're going to keep everything and see you next year, sort of thing. So they're trying to work it out for their benefit, and I think they're doing a really as good of a job as they can within this colonial context, right? I mean, my argument, and a lot of historians I know that are working on this, is Egyptology was built in a colonial context. It was built to operate as a colonial institution, and it did that very well for a long time. And what happened was it really ticked off white Europeans and white Americans when Egypt was like, yeah, you're not doing that to us anymore. There was like this 10-year period where people didn't know what to do. And are we even going to go excavate there anymore? What do we do? How do we handle this? How do we deal with them? And they've started to work it out a bit. But I have a few friends who go and they visit and they excavate a lot, and they get I won't name any names, but they do get permission from the Egyptian, Department of Antiquities. Like, yes, you can go visit, you can bring people into these places. And the Europeans who are doing the excavating there, they sort of walk up and they're just like, you can't come in here. And it's like, well, actually, yes, I can, because the Egyptians who own all of this gave me that permission, right? So there's still this interplay of, no, this is ours as Europeans. No, it's actually not. And it never really was. So I know that's a really long answer to say, I don't know that there is any good answer except for completely dismantling the whole thing. And how do you do that? That's kind of what we're trying to figure out. Excellent question. Yeah. Yes. Yes, I did. Yeah. So I used to live in Egypt, and this was a trip I actually took just a few years ago. I did go to the Temple of Mut, and it's awesome. I'm absolutely a tourist when I go. Like, I have a list of things I need to do, but also it's just like, I just want to go and be like, whoa, that's awesome. And that's basically what I do the whole time. Yeah.
Well, then the previous question begs another question. What is the moral and other impetus for stuff that was taken from Egypt over the years to be returned to Egypt?
The impetus is strong. Zahi Hawass is really pulling for a lot of that. And I think that the effort in building the Grand Egyptian Museum that's out on the Giza Plateau right now, that's part of the goal of that, is to start to bring back a lot of those objects. Because the Egyptian Museum that is on Tahrir Square is 119 years old. It was built in 1902. When it does rain in Cairo, because it actually does rain, the windows on the roof are open to the rain. So it just rains into the museum. So it was not a great place overall. The only place in that museum there were two places that were, what's it called? Climate controlled. The mummies, like where Ramses II is, and the King Tut stuff, like so where his gold mask is. That's all climate controlled. Everything else is just sort of open to the elements. So I think part of it was, we're going to build this museum to begin to start to get our stuff back. And so when places like the British Museum go, this is ours fair and square, well, it's not really, because you didn't take it fair and square, right? And they also have 90% of their Egyptian stuff in storage. So they're not showing it to anybody. They're not, they have tons of duplicates. My argument would be, just give a lot of it back. Do you have to give everything back? Maybe not. But like the Rosetta Stone, that would be a really nice gesture, right? Give it back. So it is. I mean, there's a book actually that came out. It's by Dan Hicks called The Brutish Museum, which talks a lot about just the colonial context of the British Museum and taking all of these things and how they should go back.
Well, and that's a big mountain to climb.
Yeah.
Having seen the Rosetta Stone in the British Museum.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's the crown jewel, right?
Of their Egyptian collection, yeah.
How would the British, for all of the change in morality over the years, what's right and what's not right, how would they say, okay, we're just going to donate this back because it's right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a Mount Everest.
Oh, it absolutely is. It's very difficult. It would be very difficult. Yeah. And it's what I love about the Rosetta Stone is the British have the original version on display. And then in the Louvre, the French had actually found the Rosetta Stone. Napoleon and his troops had found it in Rosetta in a foundation deposit. And as they were sending it back to Europe, their boat got overtaken by the British. So all of that stuff was the spoil of war. In the Louvre, they have a replica of it, and the label is basically says like, we found it first, but the British took it. And it's in the British Museum now, but this is a good replica. And man, they're still fighting over it, you know? And it's just like, but it's neither of yours. Yeah.
And it's still hard to see because there's a crowd of Japanese schoolgirls around. You can't see.
It's hard. No, it's really hard to see the front. Go around to the back because the back is really pretty too. And nobody's around that side. Question? Who said that? Woo! I mean, that sounds right, but that's harsh. Yeah, so she said that she saw a lecture at the British Museum a few years ago, and the lecturer said, we pillaged and plundered the world, and it's ours and we're not giving it back. Yeah. I would love to know who that was because I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, that's tough. Yes.
I'm not an expert, obviously. I'm kind of curious if there's like a more like colonial version of Egyptian history that they like may or may not teach. What actually happened or like Egyptian version.
Yeah, so should like high schools or K through 12 teach something a little bit less colonial? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if like your research has found any like discrepancy between like what is like massively preached through like.
Yeah, we could start with the question of were Egyptians white? Right? The answer is no, they weren't. So yeah, but I mean, we see stuff like Cleopatra, like Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra, right? I mean, her skin was like white marble. That was probably likely not the case. Cleopatra was, she was one of the descendants of the Ptolemies, and they were Greek, but there was a lot of intermarrying and things like that. So Cleopatra probably wasn't white. And the Egyptians definitely weren't. They weren't Arab, right? They weren't of Arab descent, but they definitely did not have white skin. Yeah, so we could start there, right? I mean, we could start with skin color and move on to, to religious beliefs and not make them so foreign and fantastical, because they're easier to understand than people make them out to be. Yeah. Excellent question. Or how are we doing on time? Okay. Just make sure. These are great questions. Super fun. I could talk about it all night long. Really could. Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you all again for coming, and thank you for presenting. So we do this every third Tuesday. So next month, the presentation will be on December 21st, very close to Christmas. Hope you can make it. The presenter is going to be Dr. John Dreyer, who is going to talk about the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald back in 1975. So thanks for coming again. Good to see you. Hope to see you next month. Still mic.
Oh, yeah, but I muted it. Okay.